Before we get into today's lesson though, I just would like to go over some of the homework that I gave you last lesson, primarily the diploma type questions, okay? Because this really shows you where you should put in your effort when you're studying for this first part of chapter 15. So if we take a look at this question here, it says, which of the following rows describes the typical locations of embryos 1 and 2 in a pregnant woman? So if we take a look at these two embryos, embryo number 1, this is what we call a morula. Okay, and this one right here, this shows a hollow ball of cells, and it shows differentiation. So we have an outer layer of cells, and we have this inner kind of flattened disc. What this embryo is called at this point is a gastrula. Okay? Now, where would these structures appear? So structure number 1, the morula, the solid ball of cells, this would be in the fallopian tube. Okay, so the solid ball of cells is still in the fallopian tube. It does not become a hollow ball of cells until it reaches the uterus, at which point it becomes a blastocyst. Now, once it implants, that blastocyst undergoes gastrulation, and we get this flattened embryonic disc that forms, okay? And this happens in the uterus. Specifically, and I know that's not in the question, but this would be after implantation in the endometrium, okay? So the correct answer would be D. This question says, which of the following rows identifies layer X as shown in the diagram above and the structures that will develop from this layer? So in a gastrula, we have that disc, and that disc has 3 layers. The ectoderm, the mesoderm, and the endoderm. And what that disc will do is it will fold. Okay, so the outer layer of cells, this would be the ectoderm. The middle layer of cells would be the mesoderm. And this inner layer of cells right here would be the endoderm. Now, in our previous lesson, I had you guys put a big star beside this because I said that it's 100% chance that you're going to be asked about these germ layers on your diploma. Okay, so you need to know what organ systems will arise from these layers. Now, layer X is the endoderm, and the endoderm is going to form the GI tract, okay? That's one of the major organ systems that forms from this endoderm, okay? So our answer to this one would be B. Now this question asks about the extra embryonic structures, all right? So here we have a number of different structures. We have number 1, which is the amniotic sac, okay? We have number 2, this is the placenta. We have number 3, this is the umbilical cord, and we have number 4, this is the yolk sac. So what it's asking you here is it's telling you some functions of these structures, and it's asking you to place the number according to the function. So A says provides protection. So we learned that the amniotic sac provides protection for the growing embryo. Okay, it allows the embryo to be suspended in fluid. Okay, so A would be number 1, the amniotic sac. B, transports embryonic blood. So blood from the embryo would be transported into the baby's side of the placenta, where it would allow for exchange between baby's blood and mom's blood. So how does that blood get to the placenta? Through the umbilical cord. Okay, so B would be 3, the umbilical cord. Used for nourishment in vertebrates other than mammals. So vertebrates other than mammals, things like birds, fish, okay, that sort of thing. And they would need a yolk sac, right, or a yolk. Now in mammals, we still have this yolk sac, but we don't really use it for nourishment. Okay, so C would be number 4. And D, the site of exchange between embryonic and maternal blood, that happens in the placenta. All right? So pretty straightforward question, but if you don't know what these things are called and you don't know their functions, you'd be pretty lost here. So you need to know your extraembryonic structures. Chorionic villus sampling is a procedure in which a sample of chorionic villus tissue is collected during early pregnancy so it can be analyzed for chromosomal disorders. One CVS technique is performed by inserting a thin plastic tube known as a catheter into the vagina and passing through another opening to reach the chorionic villus. Okay? Now, chorionic villus, this is formed, these are finger-like projections that are formed from the chorion, which comes from the trophoblast, which is the outer layer of embryonic cells. So these cells come from the embryo. They're going to have the embryo's chromosomes and genes, not mom's. All right? So that's why we do chorionic villus sampling, to test the baby's chromosomes. All right? Now, to get at those chorionic villus, a catheter has to be inserted into the vagina, passes through another opening to get to the chorionic villus. Okay? So match the three structures related to pregnancy numbered in this diagram above with the descriptions below. So the amnion. Now the amniotic sac, okay, surrounds the baby. So that would be number 2. Now, many people would put number 1 there, thinking, oh, that's the amniotic sac the baby's in. You have to be really careful. What's number 1? The uterus. Okay, that's the uterus. That's the amnion around the baby, just a thin layer in this diagram. So you have to be really careful. Okay, so the amnion is number 2. The chorionic villi, they are extensions that go into the endometrium. Okay, and that's going to form the baby's part of the placenta. Okay, so that's going to be number 3. And then the structure the catheter passes through. Well, it says the catheter passes through the vagina, but there's not a number for the vagina. And then another structure, another opening. Okay, and that would be number 4. What is number 4? It's the cervix. Okay, and we know that the cervix allows for sperm to pass through and for the baby to eventually pass through. Okay, and so that's another opening. So number 4 would be the cervix. All right, so again, you have to know your anatomy as well. All right, so for today's lesson, we are going to kind of take over the development of the baby after the first 8 weeks. So remember, we can divide pregnancy a couple of different ways. We can divide human pregnancy into 3 trimesters, or we can divide it kind of into 2 stages. The first 8 weeks we call the embryological period of development. And from week 9 to the end, which is usually considered to be 38 weeks, okay, we call this the fetal period of development. So during the first trimester, growth and development of the embryo is occurring very rapidly. The foundations of all organ systems are formed during this time. All right, so if we look at a little embryo at the end of week 8, we can see all the limbs are there, the fingers, the toes, the eyes, the beginnings of a nose and ears. There's a brain, there's a spinal cord, there's a beating heart. Everything is there. It's just very immature, and it needs a lot of time for these structures to become functional, okay? And again, I want you to take a look at the embryo is at this point, right? I mentioned in the last lesson, we're talking like the size of a bean or an almond, right? Pretty small at this point, but all the structures are there. So during this first trimester, the growing embryo is very sensitive to environmental factors. Now, the embryo is protected by the amnion. Okay, it does get its nourishment from mom's blood. There is a barrier. The placenta is a semi-permeable membrane. Remember, baby's blood and mom's blood never mix together. The blood cells never mix, but exchange occurs across that placenta. The problem is that there are some harmful substances that can get through that placenta as well. So oxygen, nutrients can get through, waste products can get through, but certain fat-soluble substances can also get through, even though they are harmful. Now, any substance that is harmful to the developing baby is known as a teratogen. So poor nutrition on the part of the mother, as well as environmental contaminants such as pesticides, herbicides, drugs, over-the-counter prescription drugs, as well as street drugs. Okay, many of these can pass through the placenta. Alcohol, heavy metals like mercury. For those of you who might be outdoorsy, you might do some fishing. There are many lakes and rivers in Alberta that have high mercury contents. And there's warnings right in the fishing regulations that say pregnant women should not consume fish out of this water body, because those heavy metals can end up crossing the placenta and can harm things like brain development. Okay, nicotine. Okay, that's fat soluble. You take a drag off your cigarette, that nicotine goes into your blood, right into the baby's blood. Caffeine as well. Okay, radiation from x-rays, that sort of thing. So mothers who are pregnant want to avoid as much of these things as possible to try and lessen the impacts on the developing embryo. So if we take a look here, you guys, and we break this down into the two periods of development, okay, we have our embryonic period, which is to the end of week 8, and then from week 8 to about week 38, that's considered to be, full term for a human gestation. You can see that all the systems are there. Okay, it's just that these systems now have to start to become refined and more developed. So the red lines in this graph show the greatest sensitivity to teratogens, and the blue shows less sensitivity to teratogens. And you can see during that first 8 weeks, pretty much every system is susceptible to damage from these teratogens. Okay, once these systems are developed, the foundation is there, they are less sensitive. So teratogens can lead to all sorts of problems. Neural tube defects. Neural tube defects occur when the neural tube, which forms early on in that embryonic period, okay, right after gastrulation, we have something called neurulation. This is where kind of the foundations for the brain and spinal cord are formed. Things like folic acid. So folic acid is a vitamin that's really important in the closing of this neural tube. So pregnant women that might not get enough folic acid in their diet can have some of these problems with neural tube defects. So for example, spina bifida, this is where the spinal cord is actually born outside of the spinal column. So it can be actually born outside of the skin. And again, many of these neural tube defects are caused by a deficiency in folic acid. So it's really important that pregnant women or women that are trying to get pregnant would take a supplement of folic acid. And there's these prenatal vitamins that would be rich in that. Our government has also mandated that many of our foods have folic acid included in them to make sure that we lessen the chances of some of these neural tube defects. There is a sad case out of history in the 1950s and 60s, especially in Great Britain. There was a drug that was being prescribed by doctors to pregnant women to help with morning sickness. So morning sickness occurs for some women, doesn't necessarily have to happen in the morning, but it is nausea, vomiting because of hormonal changes. Now, some women get this so bad that it's so debilitating that they literally can't get out of bed. So drugs would be prescribed to these women to help them function. Now, one of the drugs that was prescribed in the 1950s and 60s was called thalidomide. And thalidomide, if you took thalidomide after the first 8 weeks, there would be no impact at all on the baby, and it would help the mom to overcome this morning sickness. Now, if thalidomide was prescribed early in pregnancy, it impaired the development of limbs. So many babies during this period whose mothers were prescribed this thalidomide were born with very deformed hands, feet, arms, and legs. And you can see that this is very characteristic of these babies who were born from mothers who were prescribed this early in pregnancy. Scientists don't really know how much alcohol is too much alcohol. Some women can drink through their pregnancy and the babies don't have any issues. Some women drink very little and the babies have issues. So basically they tell you if you're pregnant, don't drink. No amount of alcohol is a safe amount of alcohol. Let's not take any chances. Why? What does alcohol do? It impairs brain development during gestation. Okay, and it can result in something known as FASD. FASD stands for fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. Okay, now if we take a look at these two brains, here's the normal brain of a baby 6 weeks old, right? And you can see we talked about all these bumps and grooves, right? The sulci and the gyri, and how we can pack a bunch of gray matter in there. If you take a look at a baby with severe FASD, whose mother drank during pregnancy, you can see that the brain does not have as many of these, and this can really impair these children through their entire life. So alcohol can make it through the placenta and can really impair brain development, especially during those first 8 weeks. Now, the second trimester of human development, this is between weeks 13 and 26, is marked by rapid growth and major organ development. So the heartbeat is detectable via stethoscope, bones start to harden, fingerprints form, eyebrows and eyelashes form. The nervous system, which was the foundations were built during the first 8 weeks, begins to advance. Okay, fetus starts to respond to stimuli from the outside world, things like sound and light. Okay, by week 23, some babies, if born premature, can actually survive out of the uterus. They're very small. They require a lot of care, but the survivability is pretty good with modern medicine at this point in time. Okay, around week 24, the eyelids start to open. All right, and by the end of the second trimester, the fetus now, it's not an embryo anymore, the fetus is around 9 or 10 inches in length and can weigh, in the neighborhood of around 2 pounds type thing. Okay, still very, very small, but has a good chance of survival if born at this point in time. Now, the third trimester, this is the last trimester. This is weeks 27 to 38. At this point, development is pretty rapid in some areas, and the fetus is putting on a lot of weight. In fact, a baby's weight can increase 4 to 6 times during this trimester. Okay. The testes of the male fetus at this point should descend into the scrotum. Respiratory and digestive systems are the last to develop. Okay, so babies who might becoming premature at this time, the mothers are usually given a shot to help speed up the development of the lungs, because that's kind of the last thing that develops at this point. The brain at this point is developing 10,000 new cells per minute. Now, the birthing process has a fancy name, parturition, and this marks the end of pregnancy. So uterine contractions usually begin due to a combination of hormonal signals, fetal influence, and uterine stretch. Okay, so as the uterus stretches more and more as the baby gets bigger, okay, it releases certain chemicals. The fetus might release certain chemicals. The mother has certain hormonal signals. Okay, the hypothalamus responds to this and signals the pituitary to release oxytocin. Oxytocin stimulates the uterine muscles to contract. Remember, the uterus is made of smooth muscle. It is not under the conscious control of mom, and it has receptors for oxytocin. Now, oxytocin is released. This causes contractions of the uterus, which pushes the baby down against the cervix. The more contractions, the more oxytocin, which makes more contractions, more oxytocin. Remember, from our discussion of the endocrine system, we call this positive feedback. Okay, so more contractions equals more oxytocin, which equals more contractions. As the contractions become more numerous, they become closer together, they become more vigorous. At the same time, the cervix is dilating, meaning the opening of the cervix is becoming larger and larger, and this is what we call labor. So the birthing process is usually broken down into 3 stages. Okay, stage 1 can last anywhere from 2 to 20 hours. This is where uterine contractions occur and oxytocin causes the cervix to open or dilate. Okay, contractions don't last very long and are relatively far apart. Okay, the amniotic sac can break at this point and the amniotic fluid is released through the cervix and through the vagina. I think some people might know this as a woman's water breaks. You might have heard of that term before. Stage 2 can last anywhere from half an hour to 2 hours. At this point, uterine contractions become more frequent and forceful, pushing the baby through the cervix into the birth canal. The baby's head rotates, making it easier to pass through the birth canal. This is kind of what we think of when we think of active labor. If you've ever watched kind of TV shows, medical dramas, this is where mom is pushing. Now, stage 3, this stage of birth is actually after the baby is actually born. Okay, so baby is born, the umbilical cord would be cut. Uterine contractions continue to occur, and the placenta and umbilical cord detach from the uterus and are expelled from the uterus. Sometimes this is known as afterbirth. Okay, the placenta and the umbilical cord. And again, this happens after the baby is born. Okay, usually 10 to 15 minutes later. So hormones control the onset of lactation. What is lactation? It's the secretion and formation of breast milk, right? Makes mammals unique. Now, prolactin is the hormone responsible for milk production. Okay, production. It is not secreted during pregnancy. Okay, estrogen and progesterone have a negative feedback effect on prolactin. But once the mother has given birth, the pituitary begins to produce and secrete it. Milk production starts within a few days after birth, but we often see babies suckling right after they're born. So what are they suckling if there's no milk there until a few days after pregnancy? They're consuming a substance known as colostrum. Okay, it's not milk. Colostrum is a thin yellowish fluid that contains way more protein and less fat. And colostrum also contains antibodies from the mother. And these antibodies can actually be absorbed by the baby, and it gives the baby a head start on immunity. Breastfed babies tend to be healthier, have healthier immune systems. They tend to have less allergies and less asthma in childhood than non-breastfed mothers. Now, not all mothers can breastfeed, okay? But if you can, it is highly recommended that you do because of the colostrum and the benefits, especially to the immune system. Now, when the baby suckles, it stimulates nerve endings in the nipple. Again, we talked about this link between the nervous system and the endocrine system. So there are nerves that come from the nipple, okay, that go to the hypothalamus, and this in turn stimulates the pituitary to release oxytocin. Oxytocin causes contractions of the smooth muscles in the mammary glands, and contractions cause milk to flow. So oxytocin causes milk to flow. Prolactin causes milk to be produced. Two different aspects of lactation, okay? If suckling does not occur, or if it stops, milk production will stop. Conversely, increased suckling stimulates increased milk production, which can continue for years. All right, that's the end of chapter 15. There's some homework in your note package, including some old diploma questions that I would like you to look at.